Dylan had sworn he would never go back, yet that night under the heavy sky, when the rain pressed down on the streets, he found himself running without even realizing it. His heart was pounding not from exhaustion but from a storm inside his chest, and the only place it seemed to push him toward was Bai Lu's door. The city was quiet except for the sound of his footsteps. Every corner he turned was filled with memories. The small cafe, where she once laughed so hard she had to cover her face. The bookstore, where he had caught her reading the last page of a novel before buying it. The bridge, where they had stood in silence, watching the water move, as if it carried the weight of everything they could not say. He had promised himself those memories would stay locked away, but they were pulling him now like an unseen thread. When he reached her street, he slowed his pace. His mind was battling itself, part of him wanting to run away before she could see him, and part of him needing her to open that door. The light in her living room was still on, which made his chest tighten. He walked up the path, his shoes soaked, his hands trembling as he knocked softly, at first, then louder. The door opened, and there she stood, wearing a loose sweater, her hair falling over her shoulders. The first thing he noticed was her eyes. They carried the same warmth he had been missing, but now there was something else, a guardedness, as if she had learned how to protect herself from him. She did not speak at first, and neither did he. The air between them was heavy with all the words that had been left unsaid. Finally, he stepped inside without her inviting him, and she did not stop him. He stood in the middle of her living room, looking around at the familiar space, the same books, the same photographs, but one frame was missing from the shelf. He knew instantly which one. It was the picture of the two of them taken on that windy night at the seaside when he had held her close, so she would not shiver. She sat on the couch, her voice calm but sharp. "What do you want, Dylan?" She did not look at him when she spoke. Instead, her gaze stayed fixed on the steam rising from the mug in her hands. He took a step closer and said quietly, "I want to come home." She laughed, then not out of amusement but disbelief. "Home, Dylan? You left, and you burned every bridge. You told me to forget you, and I tried." His voice cracked when he answered, "I told you to forget me because I thought it would save you from me, but the truth is I was wrong. I thought I could live without you, but every day felt like I was walking through an empty city." Her hands tightened around the mug. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to remind him of the nights she cried alone, the mornings she woke up to silence, the weeks when every headline made her wonder if he had moved on, but instead she found herself remembering the way he used to wait outside her set for hours just to walk her home, the way he once stayed up all night just to make sure she finished her script without falling asleep at her desk. When she finally looked at him, her voice softened. "Why now, Dylan? Why, after everything?" He took another step, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because no one else feels like you, and no place else feels like home." There was a long silence. The clock on the wall ticked. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. She stood up, walked past him toward the window, and stared out into the night. He thought she would tell him to leave, but instead she said one sentence that made his knees weaken. "If you walk away this time, do not come back again." He nodded, not as a promise to leave, but as a vow to stay. He walked to her slowly, and when he reached her, she did not step back. His hands trembled as he touched her face, and she closed her eyes for just a moment, letting herself feel the warmth she had missed. They stood there under the dim light, both knowing the past could not be erased, but maybe, just maybe, it could be rewritten. And in that moment, Dylan knew. He had not just run back to her, he had run back to the only part of himself that still felt alive. The night stretched on as if time itself had decided to slow down for them. The air in Bai Lu's living room felt different now, heavier, yet warmer. The rain outside had stopped, but droplets still clung to the window, catching the glow from the street lamp. Her hands were still resting at her sides, her face unreadable, but her eyes gave away everything: the conflict, the longing, the fear of opening the door to someone who had already walked out once. Dylan did not sit. He stood across from her, his heart aching with every second she stayed silent. He wanted to fill the space with words, but he knew this was her moment to decide whether she would let him in again, not just into her home, but into the parts of her heart he had broken before. She finally moved to the kitchen, not looking at him, as she took another mug from the cupboard and poured hot tea into it. The quiet sound of the liquid hitting the ceramic felt almost too loud in the stillness. She placed the mug on the table between them without meeting his gaze. "Drink it before it gets cold," she said. Her voice was low but steady, as if she was trying to keep herself from shaking. He picked it up, the warmth of the mug seeping into his fingers like it was thawing something inside him. He sipped it slowly, not because he wanted the tea, but because it was the first thing she had given him in what felt like a lifetime. Do you remember? She began, her eyes fixed on the dark liquid in her own mug. The night we stayed on the rooftop until sunrise, you said you would always be here. She laughed softly, bitterly. Always, you said. His chest tightened at the memory. That night had been perfect, the city lights below them, the wind tugging at her hair, the quiet way she leaned against him. He had meant every word then, but somewhere along the way his fear, his pride, his mistakes had stolen those promises from him. I remember everything, he replied, every laugh, every fight, every time you looked at me like I was worth something even when I didn't believe it myself. She shook her head as if trying to push his words away. You cannot just run back and expect me to forget all the times I waited and you did not show up. His voice trembled when he spoke again. I am not asking you to forget, Bai Lu. I am asking you to let me prove I will never do it again. The room fell into silence once more, but this time it was not the same crushing weight. As before, it felt like the air was shifting slowly, like a door half open waiting to be pushed. Bai Lu stood up and walked to the shelf, picking up the missing frame he had noticed earlier. She placed it on the table. The photograph was slightly faded, but the image was still clear. The two of them standing by the sea, her hair tangled from the wind, his arm around her as if he was afraid she might vanish. I took it down because it hurt to see it, she admitted. I thought if I hid it I could hide you from my mind, but it turns out you were everywhere even when I tried to forget. His throat tightened. He reached out and touched the edge of the frame, his fingers brushing against hers for the first time that night. The contact was electric, and it made her pull her hand back slightly, though she did not move away completely. He looked straight into her eyes. I am not leaving again, Bai Lu, not even if you tell me to. I will fight for this every day until you believe me. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Her gaze searched his face, as if she was looking for the truth in his eyes, and what she saw there made her hesitate just a second longer before turning away toward the window again. The moonlight spilled into the room, catching the glint of unshed tears in her eyes. She whispered almost to herself, if you break me again, I will not survive it. He stepped closer, his voice firm, yet filled with something almost fragile. I know, and that is why I am here, to make sure I never give you another reason to. The night was far from over, but something had shifted between them. The air no longer felt like the end of something, but the fragile beginning of something they both thought they had lost forever.